Today's guest is Justin Fessler. He's Vice President of Public Sector at LogicMonitor and a mentor for YearUp, which we'll hear about later. And Justin and I have known each other. We were kind of reminiscing on this maybe up to 10 years ago. We met here in the DC area through networking and interaction, going to events and whatnot. So thanks for joining me today, Justin.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's been a long time and it's great to stay connected for so long.
Yeah, so for those who have not met you, had a cocktail with you, talk about your background. Talk about where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. Actually, I think we originally met when I was at IBM, probably about over a decade ago or so. I was in the Watson group. I actually started before the Watson group. I was there for about 10 and a half years. When I left, I was running AI and data science strategy circa 2019. I went over to Salesforce, working with some of the Department of Defense clients, eventually making my way over to Yext. So one of the first best kept secrets that I've been at, working with the federal government and public sector. And now I'm at the second best kept secret, LogicMonitor, running their public sector division.
So, kind of rolling the clock back, did you know what you wanted to do growing up? Did you have a clue that you were going to get into what we're doing today?
It's funny, when I look back on it, probably about 5, 6, 10 years ago, I did kind of follow in some of the footsteps that I thought I would, just in a different way.
Hmm.
When I graduated high school, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. So my dad was 39 years IBM. He was probably 35 in at that point in time. And I was like, you know what? IBM is a great company. I want to work for them. So went into college, actually in the Watson School of Engineering after Thomas J. Watson, learned about after a year that I hated programming and honestly took a year off. So when I went back to school in Binghamton, I switched my major, went over to economics, um, and happened to, when I graduated, land a job with IBM. So I ended up exactly where I wanted to be. There was a couple changes that occurred, and the team that I was supposed to go on about 4 months into the role kind of got dissolved. So ended up entering purchase orders with the Brazilian team, something that I never thought I would do, didn't even know existed at the company. And then another 2, 3, 4 months in, they said, "Hey, Justin, you're going to go sell software to the federal government." And I said, "Hey, cool. What does that mean?" So I ended up being in the tech company that I wanted to, selling the type of technology that I wanted to, artificial intelligence, data management, content management, but working with an industry that I had no experience in, didn't even know really existed besides for my uncle who was with the Department of Defense and the Air Force for a while. I'm sure you can see the flight helmet in my background, the planes on the wall. But he was a rescue helicopter and fighter jet pilot in Korea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was a really cool guy. And that's really all I knew of the government at that point in time. And that's going back to 2000, early 2009. And since then, I've never looked back.
And that's very interesting because, I mean, that's around the time you and I met. And I remember you coming and giving presentations on using Watson for some really cool stuff. I think you used like a Department of Transportation data set. You were showing the correlation between, I think, accidents and car parts or something. It was very, very impressive. So kudos, kudos if this is an area you didn't know a lot in because you nailed it on the presentation.
Thank you. And you have a great memory. It was NHTSA, and it was, and funny enough, going back to late 2009, early 2010, when the Toyota sticking brake pedal issue
Yep.
was occurring, IBM, using that technology that you just described, found the Toyota issue before Toyota did.
Yeah,
And
that's a
that's why
great
we were
story.
able to go in and show you that technology. And if I remember correctly, it wasn't even to present to you necessarily. It was a wider audience, more of a think tank around how this new emerging technology, natural language processing, was able to identify trends. And fast forward, here we are 15 years later with the inception and this explosion of GPT and these
Yeah.
large language models. And it's really kind of incredible to see not just what I thought I was getting into in the federal marketplace, but the evolution of this AI stuff that's been around since the 70s and is now really getting commercialized to the point where it's human on the loop, not even human in the loop, but human on the loop. I understanding that these LLMs can just be so powerful and generate so much content for us, all things considered with hallucinations, right? Got to put that in. But it's just wildly impressive to see where the technology has come, even in the decade plus that I've known you.
Yeah, I think it's funny that we talk a lot about Gen AI and hallucinations now when the same problem existed before, right? It was just the
Yeah.
algorithm. It was the bias in the algorithms is what we used to talk about at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
even back then, taking IBM and Watson into account, what the LLMs or natural language processing was meant to do is create hypotheses,
yeah.
right? And that's what they're still doing today. It's creating hypotheses. Back then, it was never meant to say what the problem was for legal reasons, right? If Watson diagnosed something wrong, there's a big problem, right? But it's really meant to provide more automation
Mhm.
and allow people to scale to factors that our brains can't do without technology. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I have given that example from that presentation. That presentation has resonated with me for a long time in terms of the power of AI, machine learning. And sure, Gen AI brings another, layer of complexity and ability on top of that. But I have given that example to a number of people, and I think it does illustrate just the power and capability of machines. And then it, like you said, point something out to us, and then we can go further investigate it.
yeah, yeah, it's about scale. It's about being able to consume massive amounts of information that would take us years, decades, where a computer system can read and make correlative values in seconds.
Yeah. And quantum will flip the bit on that even further.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. Yeah.
So were you in that same unit the whole time you were at IBM, or did you kind of move around a little bit?
Yeah, it was kind of an organic move. So Watson started within the content management group. So I happened to be in that group and then understood the technology, was able to relay it to the DOT, able to relay it to FAA and a couple of others. And through that evolution, the Watson brand was actually created.
Oh, okay.
Uh, yeah, and then probably about, I think they were started in 2014, and then in 2015, I got pulled into that group, that business unit, and then was able to build the strategy and the go-to-market with the federal organization. And I actually was helping with about, I think, 6 other industries also. So it was a very interesting time to see that evolution and where IBM was able to create this completely new brand and new marketing go to motion as they were one of the first ones in the space with NLP. So that was another kind of, to your point earlier, pivotal career move in my world, because this new startup company within this behemoth organization was just getting started, and I was at the inception of it.
That's
So I
amazing.
guess a lot of change occur.
And that's always a great opportunity, right? I mean, you never plan for those.
No,
They happen. You ride the horse as long as you can.
yeah, yeah. And I think Salesforce was a great example of that too. I wasn't prepared to leave IBM. Things were evolving there. Salesforce came at the right time with the right group of people to work with. And again, pivotal point in my career where IBM was thinking just at their inception of FedRAMP, and Salesforce was thinking impact level 5. Ooh, right? In the Department of Defense, like that's really important to be able to work with them behind the firewall. That was an incredible point in my career. I learned so much about the engagement model and how it's different with the DoD than the federal civilian agencies and the types
That
of contractors you have to work with.
that's really good knowledge to have as well. There's not a lot of companies that actually, I think, understand that, right? They either start in the DoD space and then they have no clue. They think they can interact with the civilian government the same way, and it doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
and vice versa. I've worked in both. I did consulting in the DoD space, and then I've worked as a Fed in the government civilian, and they are completely different beasts.
You started to start on the hard side.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And having all those additional security protocols, going from FedRAMP to FedRAMP high, I'm sorry, say moderate to high to
Yeah.
4, 5, 6, and having that complete vision on how to deliver those high side and low side solutions to the government. Salesforce was incredible at that.
Hmm.
Um, Next pivotal moment in my career was getting back to NLP, going back to Yext, and just seeing the evolution in a short 2.5 year time between when I left IBM and when I got to Yext. The technology went from not giving answers to giving answers, and
Hmm.
confidently, and knowing that there's traceability behind the scenes, and say, this is exactly how we got to that answer. And I'm not saying it's in a medical context again, but being able
Right.
to understand unstructured content in the form that it's in break it down into what are more consumable answers that citizens can interface with really quickly, right? You know just as well as I do. Government
Yeah.
websites aren't the greatest, right?
Right.
A lot of data. So just seeing that change in the, again, short period of time where the AI can make correlations, but then answer based on those correlations was really pivotal also.
So was it the technology that they employed that made them the best kept secret, or was it the culture, or a little bit of everything?
It actually was their lack of presence in public sector. Yeah, it's just it was a new market to them. They had a great foothold in, financial services and healthcare. There was a couple pits and stops with public sector. It's just not something that their main focus was on. And funny enough, um, you've probably used Yext in your everyday activities, going out to Google and saying, "Where's the closest post office?"
Yeah.
Right? That's Yext. And no one knows that because you ask the question through Google,
Right.
right? And the Postal Service was a really great customer for what Yext does because they really started as a listing company. Where are those physical locations that I, as a consumer, can go in and interface with someone?
Hmm.
Postal Service has 31,000 locations, and
Jeez.
that's a great place for Yext to be.
And they
You,
have them in the most unusual places. Like here in my town, we have one inside of some store, like an Ace Hardware or something. It's crazy.
they're incredibly obscure. And you know what? I'll tell you a little secret. The blue boxes on the corners, those aren't even managed yet. They don't have pinpoint, crosshairs across roads of where those are. But
Hmm.
that's something that Yext helps with, which is not something I ever even knew existed,
Yeah.
right? I've heard about search engine optimization, but I've never heard about organic versus paid versus, how these things get ranked on these major search engine providers. And I've been in the search space for like 15 years, right? It's always been enterprise search. It's never been optimized search through the publishers, and learning about that and how different, I don't know, real estate agents rank in comparison. There's a lot of schema and markup language and algorithms that go into that also. And it's just that was something I never even could have pictured myself getting into at all.
Yeah, that whole concept of not curated responses, but certainly, like you said, ranked or priority or somehow, of course,
Yeah.
there's this, besides the sponsored stuff, right? But how the right thing bubbles up it's a phenomenal story of technology and ingenuity for how that works behind the scenes.
Yeah. And I think what Google and some of the other publishers are doing, the Bings of the world, they're putting more emphasis on government information now, which is great, right? So you're always gonna have the sponsored paid stuff bubbling up, but now you're not gonna have the third party stuff bubbling up. If there's gonna be a lot more presence of government official information, which needs to be the case. That's how government rebuilds trust, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You don't want to rely on the turbo taxes of the world to figure out how to file an extension. You want to go to IRS. And I think that's
Yeah.
a prime example, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's been just between Salesforce and Yext, kind of eye opening to see these different technologies that were tertiary to what I've always done differently in the way that information gets exposed out to the public.
Hmm. And so then that brought you to LogicMonitor.
It brought me to LogicMonitor, which is something completely different. Never thought I would be in the IT, like the bare metal monitoring space. But as I look at the technology, I mean, you and I had a conversation earlier today on where it might benefit some place in the SEC. Every government organization has something like us. And I've always been in this nice to have AI space, natural language processing, LLMs, which government's really not funded for until recent, right?
Right.
It's always been this nice to have technology around automation, and LogicMonitor is this need to have. It really goes right into that zero trust paradigm that you want to make sure that your applications are available, they're reliable, they're continuous, and they're secure, making sure that people can get to them when they need to, and that no one's getting in, nefarious individuals are not getting into the network when they are trying to. It's more holistically holistic visibility into the environment. But of course, just like everyone, we've got LLMs in the platform, right? But they're specifically tailored to answer questions around infrastructure, right? So we're not looking at things like hallucinations. We're making sure that the data set is finite. ServiceNow is a great data source for us. We've got pre-built integrations with them. So if things are going on the network, we can query the ticketing system. How was this remediated last time? And how
Mm.
does it impact us now? So as much as I didn't expect to be in the space, I think my history has kind of followed me throughout my career, and it's offered me the ability to stay with this natural language processing stuff that is more widely accepted than it was 10 years ago, more widely used than it was 10 years ago. But as we have all seen as of recent with the Biden administration, there's going to be a lot more policy around it.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be, and governance especially. Oh my goodness, there needs to be governance around it, because there's always going to be changes and evolutions, and someone's always going to do something better and different. And as long as we end up getting to the same result at the end of the day, that's trusted, it's verified, it's validated, I think that's all that matters to make sure that people are finding the right answers. I feel like I'm at Yext again. Sorry.
Well, I think it's very interesting because you're at a product company. It's just another product company, right? Different type of product, different focused area. But I think, as you just mentioned, the technology, the AI, ML, Gen AI, all those things now are almost being embedded in every product. I mean,
Everything. Yeah.
just look at Microsoft; they put it in everything in Office. Uh, and because of that, your past history, though, I think becomes valuable now at a product company.
I hope you're right.
That's my
Honestly,
speculation. We'll see. We'll see how that pays off.
I hope so. And, I'll even give, I'm an advisor also for some startups that are trying to break into the federal marketplace, federal integrator community. I'll even plug one of the groups that I'm working with, GovDash.
Hmm.
They've developed a platform where you leverage large language models for RFP responses.
Oh, interesting.
It's really cool. And more holistically, what they're looking at is they've incorporated the FAR. You can literally ingest the PWS, the statement of work, the RFP, your win themes. You can ingest all of your product and partner content. Hit a button. You get the response written. You get a scoring rubric and how you're going to be great in a matter of hours
Wow.
versus days versus weeks of us sitting there collaborating, writing our little bits of pieces, going back and forth through Word or Office or whatever it is, right? And they've actually embedded what I would call a copilot directly inside of the Office platform. So as you're reviewing and collaborating, I pop this out. How do I do this? And it fixed on the fly.
Yeah. Wow.
It's just incredible where this stuff has come.
Yeah. Where's the version that writes my SOW for me so we can have AI doing both sides?
Hey, and wouldn't it be nice if it was speech to text? I'm saying. It knew what I was thinking and it wrote it for me. Just had
I say that almost in jest, but at the same time, it would be helpful, right? That's why these tools are going to exist and why they're going to get embedded, because I can't tell you how many. I'm sure you've seen plenty of statements of work or statements of objective, and you're going, "What in the world are these people thinking?" Right? Did they do like a logic check even on this content? And now I don't think GNA will fix that because GNA could introduce more of those, but maybe it'll free up the time to do logic checks
Yeah,
because we're not sitting there writing the nuts and bolts, because the nuts and bolts should have been the easiest thing to put together.
yeah. The requirements should always drive everything else, right? The
Yeah.
document. At the end of the day, what what prevents us from getting to a point where Gen AI is writing the statement of objectives or the right, and then Gen AI is responding to it? How do we pick the best response? Does Gen AI at that point just become a funnel? I heard the other day that an RFP was released. I don't remember the agency or what it was about. They were expecting 20 or 30 responses. They got 200
Hmm.
because, and by the way, some of those responses they said were almost identical.
Uh-oh. I mean, so now that's where we have to worry about, right? AI, like we've worried about that in school for a while now, right? Somebody could use ChatGPT to write a paper.
Yeah.
I liked what you were just talking about with GovDash, so I'll have to go check them out. Where they're just out of curiosity, where they're ingesting them and their partners' capability statements and everything. And to me, then it would not be identical to somebody else's in
Correct.
theory, depending how generic your statements are, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it'll drive companies to be more specific in their statements. I know the reason they're general is because they're trying to win broad work, but it's going to give us more. At the end of the day, hopefully the promise is if we leverage these tools, it frees us up from the mundane word writing to the thought leadership
Yeah.
aspects and strategy aspects, and hopefully things get better.
My opinion is it's all about the guardrails that you put on it.
Yeah.
Right. And the Chat GPT, and I use it as an example just because right, we're on there, but I use it as an example, but it's a good one. You're giving it information, it's writing a response for you, but it's retaining the information that you're giving it, right?
Mhm.
And that information gets pushed out to whatever knowledge base that anyone else is using. Something like GovDash doesn't do that, right? It gives you that boundary, those guardrails to be able to your point, generate something specific for me.
Mhm.
And that's why that government agency got kind of similar examples, because people were using open source ones
Yeah.
that were all using the same, in essence, pipeline under the covers, right? So as long as there's guardrails and there's policies around those guardrails, that's where the Gen AI is going to provide the most value, I think, to government employees, officials, citizens. But there has to be those guardrails.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess from now on, our first RFP check will have to be duplicity. All right, all the ones that are identical, you're out. Because there's
Yeah,
no way to differentiate, there's no way to rank them against each other, so they're just out.
yeah, but
I mean, it's not any different than as a government person, I've sat on many review panels for contracts, and I have seen contracts where I've seen RFPs, or not RFPs, proposals submitted that they didn't change all the words. So it's
exactly.
obvious they reused it, which I have no problem with, right? I mean, you should do what's easiest for you as a company. The smaller you are, the more you need to do that. But you can tell when the attention to detail was lacking.
But if attention to detail is lacking in a proposal,
Yeah,
it's probably not going to be there on the
that's right.
performance.
That's right. And I say that having been in industry myself, and I was on proposal writing teams, and so yeah, there's no excuse for that sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. So again, just the evolution, and to my point earlier, the ability to scale quicker,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, there's companies that are looking to use this type of technology to, when they go from writing 5, 10 proposals a year to really becoming that proposal factory. Does that
Yeah.
provide more or less value to the government if that organization wins?
Depends
They
on
might.
whether they can ramp up their staffing, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Took the words out of my mouth. They need to meet the staffing requirements.
Yeah.
Do they have to hire people? Do they have people on the bench? Can they sub? It all depends how the contract is written.
Well, if it will let companies create benches again, I'm all for it.
That's a great point. That's a
Because I
great
think
point.
I think we've suffered a lot, both the government and industry has suffered a lot when the industry as a whole kind of got away from the concept of a bench, except for the very large companies. But across the board, generally got away from the concept of bench. If you're not on an active contract, we just can't retain you because we don't have the coverage. But if there's a bigger opportunity for work, then companies will be more likely to hold on to somebody because it's expensive to hire.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
So, Justin, looking back at your career, what's something you look at and go, man, I wish that would be done differently. I wish our industry would rethink this thing. And I'm going to caveat that so that everybody knows that you're not going to necessarily have the power to fix it. You may not even have the solution for it. It's just something we need to, start to think about, and maybe in our circles when we're at cocktail parties, it'll be the thing we kind of ponder.
Yeah. I'll even, this has been going around for a while, this topic of modernized reformed acquisition processes. And I'll give a lot, I see you laughing. I'll give a lot of credit to folks like, Scott Simpson at the DHS Pill and Bonnie Evangelista at CDAO and the DoD. They're really trying to rethink how the government can acquire.
Mhm.
I think that has been historically a challenge with the way that the FAR is written, and honestly, how different people interpret clauses within the FAR and the DFAR and the five, all these different documents. There's an overwhelming amount of information for folks like yourself to have to know, to be able to, should I be able to talk to this person or not talk to this person? And some agencies like the SSA, I think is a good example. Their contracting shop is trying to re-educate a lot of their personnel about meeting with vendors and why it's important to, not necessarily because you're going to buy everything from the vendor, but it's education, it's enablement, it's knowing
Hmm.
what's out there that may or may not fit exactly what you're trying to do, but why it might influence other factors within an agency. So I think that reform and acquisition, not necessarily reform and procurement, but the whole acquisition process and the enablement process around it, I would love to see reforms and modernization efforts around that and see more interfacing with from technology companies directly to the procurement and acquisition shops. I think that would be important and empowering for them to understand why technology is important to the agency. And maybe then they would be able to broker introductions to the people that they feel are most relevant versus technology companies having to go from the IT organization into acquisition. There should be a much more streamlined interaction between IT acquisition and the program shops.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. That's, I mean, as a government person, and certainly not speaking for my agency whatsoever, I've not actually done a contract at this agency yet, and not in this kind of scale that I'm used to even know what their process is. But that is something that is challenged. You know, this is my fifth federal agency. That is a challenge everywhere, and I talk to a lot of people in government. It's a challenge everywhere. Some agencies are better than others.
Mhm.
A lot of agencies are not, and there's a lot of fear. Organizations don't even give their staff time, right? If people are out there talking about, hey, you should hear the cool stuff my agency cares about, because then you might be able to produce a better proposal at some point in the future when we actually have a requirement,
Yeah.
because you understand our mission better. Those people are just talking on their own, because and on their own time and on their own dime if they're going to events. And
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I agree with you. There isn't a great guidance out there, and every contracting office for every agency has a different approach.
Yeah. So
We can't solve it today, but I would love to solve that one. And
I
I
would
agree with
love
you.
to
I
see
mean,
that.
I have taken upon myself to interact a lot in industry, and I've done that through a number of organizations in the DC area. There's AFCEA, there's Affirm, there's ATARC, there's ACT-IAC, there's plenty of things to participate in and lots of opportunities to talk to people. Getting to meet you over the years, I think that was an ACT-IAC presentation you did.
I think it was at MCC initially.
Yes, it was. So, you just without doing those interactions, there's just no way to grow on both sides, right?
Yeah.
The
Yep.
the I want, as a government person, if I ever put a contract out, I want the best possible proposals. That I will not look at them and wonder, do I take a risk? I don't even want to have to say there's a risk. I want to say, oh my gosh, they fully understand me. They know my mission. They make a case that is compelling, and I'm excited. Let's do this. Let's make it happen. That's
Yep.
what government wants, right? And if government wants that, I agree with you. We need to reform the process so that the vendors can be well informed enough to do that.
Yeah. I heard again recently, LPTA, lowest price technically acceptable, is no longer acceptable, right? It needs to meet the requirements first and foremost.
Yeah.
And then you look at things like price and past performance. But if it's not going to meet the requirements, it shouldn't be awarded to begin with.
Yeah, I would agree. It's been so many years since I've used an LPTA. I am all about requirement first, price
Yep.
second. Price actually, the last at MCC we got really good where we didn't know the pricing until we had done every other possible evaluation.
That's the way to do it.
And then pricing came last. And then we looked at the pricing, and then the pricing might cause some conversations because something we couldn't afford or something along those lines, right? So it could
Yep.
cause conversations on the change of the reduction of requirements, or it could cause conversations and say, here's why is this one company so far out ahead, so much higher than all the rest, right? There's a lot of things that can happen once you know that information,
Yep.
but certainly not drive things up front. No
No,
way.
everything should be driven by the requirement. At the end of the day, everything needs to come down to the requirement.
But to their credit, MCC does that. They are very small. Right? That's one of the smallest
Absolutely.
agencies I've ever met. I mean, I worked at it. It's only 330 people total. And when you deal with a scale of that small, it's easier to get those kind of refined processes.
Absolutely agree. Yep. Yeah. I didn't realize only 300. Um,
Great. Yeah.
I think the smallest I've worked with was the Appalachian Regional Commission at 51 people strong.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about that is they're kind of scrappy, right?
Yeah.
I always liked MCC because there was only 14 of us, federal employees in IT. That's
Wow.
it. 14, right? We relied a lot on our contract support. We relied a lot on our partners to bring it. And so because of that, we did tons and tons of like industry days and interactions. We were very forward out there in the ACT-IAC community because we needed people to understand this agency nobody had ever heard of and the mission that they did so that we could get good bids because we had no room for error because our budget was so tiny in comparison to so many other agencies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's a good, I like your suggestion. So what's coming up for you here in the near future? Anything going on?
You know, you mentioned YearUp earlier, so I have to plug YearUp. I don't know if they have any immediately upcoming events. I think they have one in a couple of months, but this organization is just incredible. Their focus is helping underprivileged kids who might not have been afforded to go to college get back into the job market, understand what their core competencies are, their skills. They provide some incredible internships with companies like LinkedIn
Hmm,
for them to understand what being in this corporate environment looks like. And I've just been fortunate to be involved with them, mentor some of these folks. I've got ongoing mentorships with them after the program is over to help them do things like build resumes, interview, ask questions of my career, how I got into the positions that I'm in, what I did to get there. It's an incredible, incredible organization. Thank you for giving me the platform to talk about them also, Jeremy. I'd love to get you involved in the organization too. But just that is, I think, the next big thing aside from taking care of my 6-month-old daughter that I just want to mention is what an incredible organization they are and how they always try to give back, how I would love to continue that with them. And yeah, that's what's upcoming for us.
that's awesome. Well, Justin, it's always great getting to talk to you. I see you at a number of events in the DC area, and I look forward to when we're in person again, and we'll toast this episode's release.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it, Jeremy. Thanks so much for having me.